Welcome to Investigating Cybersecurity Instance, a portion of the full Cybersecurity First Responder course from Logical Operations. My name is Stacy McBride, and I'll be your instructor for this course. The course is made up of 3 sessions, and in Session 3, we're going to be following up on the results of an investigation. In Session 2, we did our forensic investigation and found the evidence that we needed. And of course, now at the end of an investigation, we do want to follow up on the results of the investigation. We're going to need to do documentation. And of course, we also need to be aware of how the law impacts our investigations. So cyber law, of course, governs the way that individuals are permitted to use computers, the internet, and other IT resources. And these cyber laws can vary from region to region, country to country, and even state to state. And so as a forensic analyst, we need to be aware of the cyber laws that could impact our particular jurisdiction, and of course also the jurisdictions that might also be involved. If we are a multinational type organization, we'd want to be aware of the differences in how the laws would affect our information security in each of those different countries. Now, as an example, in the United States, there is a law which is the U.S. Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is in Title 18 of the U.S. Code. This is Section 1030. And basically it prohibits accessing computer systems without authorization. And it's primarily targeted at financial and government institutions, but it is one of the federal laws that are on the books in the United States. In the United Kingdom, we've got the UK Computer Misuse Act, where it makes it an offense to access any computer to which you do not have the authorized right. And again, we can look that up in the URL that is presented in the courseware. So what is a cybercrime in the United States or in the UK may not be considered to be a cybercrime in other parts of the world. And so when we do have incidents that are geographically distributed, we have to understand that there may be different laws that apply where the perpetrator may be sitting than from where the victim sits, and different laws that apply to the privacy and protection of the data that might be involved as well. And so we may need to be aware of the laws of several different jurisdictions in order to properly analyze the issues. Following our investigation, we may need to act as a technical expert or a liaison with law enforcement to communicate exactly the details of the particular incident. So if we've done our investigation and we've identified that the incident involves some criminal action that we want to report or that we are required to report to law enforcement, then we are going to want to make sure that we are able to communicate the details surrounding that incident clearly and effectively through to law enforcement. Now, finding a law enforcement agency that is willing to take on your case may be a challenge because each agency may have certain thresholds that need to be exceeded before they are able to accept a case, simply because their caseload is so high that low value cases just simply will never be prosecuted. The FBI, of course, has many resources, and they're suited for dealing with major cyber crimes, and they've got training, expertise, and tools, but it's unlikely that you're going to get their attention unless you're dealing with a very significant case. On the other hand, local law enforcement agencies, perhaps the local police, may be more interested in smaller cases, but the challenge is again, that they just simply don't have the available resources to process all of those cases. And so once again, if either due to lack of resources, lack of training, or lack of tools, they may not be able to do much for us either. But depending upon the case, you may be able to find support from law enforcement. And so, of course, we want to make sure that the information that we share with them is pertinent, it is relevant to the case, and that it is the information that they need We need to find out from them exactly what else they may need from us, and also communicate to them what we need back from them so that we can, of course, support our organization and to protect its interests. The results of our investigation need to be clearly documented, and as we're doing our investigation, many of our forensic tools, especially the commercial tools like NCASE or FTK, will start to build a very detailed technical report that will make our job a little bit easier. But those reports, while they are very useful, are often far too technical and contain too much detail for general use. And so we may want to manually write our reports so that at least we've got an executive summary at the top. We've got our conclusions that we would write in. And then, of course, the supporting evidence may be drawn from those detailed reports that our tools are going to generate. But in any case, we want to make sure that the report that we create is going to answer the questions that we see on this slide. So, first of all, we need to establish a clear authority to perform the investigation. Now, you might think that documenting who authorized the investigation is not that significant, but understand that these investigations can take years in some cases, or at least the final disposition of the case may take years. And that means that by the time that the case goes to court for its final appeal, the person who authorized the investigation may no longer work with the company. And so we want to make sure that we've got the authority documented up front. We want to know what the assigned task was. So what was the focus or scope of the investigation? And if we define that, then we can show that, that is exactly what we investigated and we stayed within those bounds. We'll define what we investigated. So here we're going to detail the actual objects that we investigated. We're going to be looking at the people, the systems we've captured, hard drives, peripherals, and so on. And we'll document all of those. And we need to include details as to exactly what the system we are that we're examining. So we're going to include things like make, model, serial number, and other information like perhaps the operating system running on that system, the date and time that we seized that evidence or collected it. All that information needs to be very, very detailed and recorded. And then we want to describe what we did. Now, of course, here we're going to be documenting the actual steps that we took during our forensic investigation. We'll include the technical processes that we followed, like capturing our images and carving for files that may have been file fragments in the file system, but we'll also record things like operational processes, procedural things like maintaining the chain of custody, moving evidence in and out of the evidence locker, and so on. And then we'll describe what we found. So what were our findings? So we'll record all significant events, files that are identified, images, testimony, and so on. And of course, we will then provide our expert opinion as to what it was that we found. And as we do this, we're going to use terminology that is understandable by the common man. Using jargon is going to hamper our case. Remember, our findings may need to be presented in a court of law, and the jury needs to be able to understand what we're saying. So we have to assume that the jury, the judge, and the lawyers involved in the case don't understand the technology, and so we want to frame things in terms that are easily understood and to describe things using examples, metaphors, and similes that will bring it down to an understandable level without being condescending. And then, of course, we need to present our conclusions. We will be describing what we believe happened, how it happened, when it happened, and who we think is responsible based on our findings. Now, if we have put together our conclusions based on solid evidence that we found within our forensic investigation, then there's a good chance that those that are reading our reports are going to agree with our findings. Often, if we are dealing with a case that is being prosecuted. If the prosecution is using a forensic analyst to examine the image, the defense will get their own to also examine the image. And if we follow scientific processes that are repeatable, trustworthy processes, then their analyst should arrive at the same conclusions that our analyst did. Now, of course, there may be a slight difference in opinion in every case, but at the same time, there should be no question as to what was actually found. So in our last activity, activity 11-4, we have 3 questions that we're going to consider based on this scenario. The scenario says the investigation is nearing its conclusion, and the evidence points to Rupert as the culprit. The company has terminated his employment as of today. Although you've identified who caused the incident and how, your work is not over. You still need to write a report of your findings, as well as prepare to be involved in a criminal investigation. It's up to you to maximize the usefulness of these follow-up tasks for the benefit of the company and its continued security. So what I'd like you to do now is take a few moments to consider the 3 questions, try to identify the answers, maybe review the materials to find the appropriate answers, and then once you've done that, you could restart the recording. So if you would like to pause this now, and then once you've got your answers, come back and we'll discuss them together. So how did you do? Well, let's look at question number 1. It says autopsy offers tool-assisted reporting for your investigation, but you need to tailor a report to a wider audience that includes upper management. Based on your findings of the data breach incident, what would you include in this report? Well, of course, we might want to include things like who authorized the investigation and what our focus was in the investigation, the systems and people that we investigated and what we found, and also, of course, our conclusions with respect to the investigation. Question 2 says, based on your thorough report, management has decided to work with legal counsel to determine if any criminal charges can or should be filed. If Develtech decides to press charges, what can you do to help this initiative? Well, as a forensic investigator, of course, we should have an understanding of perhaps the laws that may govern the investigation, and also understand perhaps which laws may have actually been broken. And so because of this, we can tailor our report to address that breach of those applicable laws, and that will make it easier for our legal counsel. In question 3, it says, after consulting with its attorneys, the executives at Develtech have decided to press charges against Rupert. The company believes its intellectual property and trade secrets have been stolen for financial gain, which is a violation of the Economic Espionage Act of 1996. In the trial preparation phase, you will be tasked as a law enforcement liaison. How would you suggest collaborating with this non-technical audience? Well, of course, as a liaison, we need to understand what it is that the law enforcement individuals need from us. And we also want to communicate our needs to them. And so it's about being able to communicate openly and effectively in a concise way to be able to ensure that we are sharing useful information with law enforcement. Well, that brings us through to the end of this particular course. So in this case, you may want to consider these reflective questions related to your own experience, whether you've seen any cybersecurity incidents that required forensic investigations, and in those investigations, what type of evidence preservation techniques you saw used. Of course, if you haven't seen other incidents, you might want to do some research to identify public incidents that have occurred and find out exactly how they were handled. If you want to learn more about Cybersecurity First Responder and the training associated with that certification, please check out the Logical Operations website or use the other contact information shown on this slide to reach out to Logical Operations to find out why CFR is valuable, how you can learn the skills necessary to be able to achieve that certification, and also how to obtain the certification voucher and to how to take the actual certification exam in order to be able to attain the CFR certification. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this short course on investigating cybersecurity incidents, and I look forward to seeing you perhaps for the full course.